of this webinar is on metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer. I would like Dr. Chirag sir to welcome Dr. Bharat Parikh sir.
So, good evening, everyone. And I invite Dr. Bharat Parikh, who was my teacher when I was in GCRI. And now my colleagues, it's great to be having a senior colleague like Dr. Bharat. And I request Dr. Bharat to invite Kshitij for his lecture on a role of molecular analysis in prostate cancer, focusing on PARP.
Thank you, Chirag, for giving us this wonderful feast today. And as we have learned from these 3 sessions, biology is the key factor probably in the future. And every speaker, debate, and all panelists have underscored the importance of precision medicine probably in the future. And it is just like our fingerprint or Aadhaar card. Maybe in the future, the patients will have some fingerprint or genetic biomarker print. And as rightly said, most of the metastatic castrate sensitive patients, prostate cancer patients, will turn out ultimately to the castrate resistant tumors. So kabhi khushi, kabhi gum. And once they develop castrate resistant, then with available therapeutic options, 5-year survival is not that good. And out of this subset, around 20 to 30% of the patients, they have some molecular genomic subset of HRR gene mutations where PARP inhibitors can do wonders, or they can double the radiographic progression survival. And Dr. Kshitij Dumadia and Chirag, both are the wonderful people today who have meticulously designed this whole program. And probably Dr. Kshitij, as you have personally interacted with him for this program. He is the DNB and from Rajiv Gandhi Institute, Delhi, and he is the youngest, most promising medical oncologist in our team at HOC. Over to Dr. Kshitij Dumadia for his talk on precision medicine. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Bharat Parikh sir, for those kind words. Thank you, sir. So the topic is precision medicine in CA prostate. So let me first start with the topic itself, the precision medicine. What is precision medicine? So in simple terms, it is to treat an individual's cancer based on a specific genetic abnormalities. So we need to identify these specific genetic abnormalities. And to identify these, we need to understand the genomic landscape of prostate cancer. So as shown on the left-hand side, we have the genomic landscape of localized prostate cancer. On the right-hand side, we have the genomic landscape of metastatic CRPC. And I cannot see all those genes written in small letters, but I can make out on the left-hand side the genes, the dots, they are widely spaced, while on the right-hand side, they are congested. It means there are more mutations, there are more actionable alterations seen in metastatic setting compared to localized setting. There can be alterations involving the androgen receptor pathway, the PI3-AKT pathway, the DNA damage repair pathways, cell cycle regulators, etc. So the important thing is to identify this specific genetic abnormality in an individual's cancer and then to treat it accordingly. So there can be, as far as prostate cancer is concerned, this specific genetic abnormalities, the first thing which comes to our mind is DNA damage repair pathway, for which we can use PARP inhibitors. So how common is this DNA damage repair pathway mutations? Or to be precise, homologous recombination gene alterations. So a large database of about 2,800 tumor samples from PROfound, a phase 3 trial of olaparib, it showed that 28% of the patients, they had some HRR gene alterations, be it somatic or be it germline. And these are the 15 HRR genes which were analyzed in this particular trial. The most common is BRCA2. The other commoners are ATM, CDK12, BRCA1, etc. So out of these 28, there might be a germline as well as somatic mutations. As far as the germline mutations are concerned, there are 12% in men with M1 prostate cancer. They are less common in localized prostate cancer. Somatic DNA repair mutations, they are seen in 10% in men with metastatic CRPC. If we are going to check only the germline mutations, we are going to miss on these 10% of the somatic mutations. Now, the important thing is when to send what, I mean, when in which stage of prostate cancer, be it localized or a metastatic, we need to send what, a germline or a somatic testing. So straight away, I'm going to show the guidelines when to do a germline testing, as clearly shown in a localized prostate cancer, high risk, anything T3 onwards, high risk localized or very high risk, node positive or metastatic, we need to send a germline testing. Coming to somatic testing and specifically the HRR gene testing, when should one send an HRR gene testing? It is clinically indicated in patients with metastatic prostate cancer. When to send an MSI testing? In metastatic CRPC. When to send TMB? In metastatic CRPC. To summarize, HRR in metastatic prostate cancer, it can be considered in regional, but predominantly in metastatic prostate cancer, MSI in CRPC, TMB in CRPC. Now, the second question, how to send this from the primary tumor or from the metastatic site? So, as already mentioned, the mutations, they are more enriched in metastatic setting. It is always better to sample from the metastatic site. Another important thing is, as shown in this slide, the data from the larger PARP inhibitor trials, PROfound and TRITON2, 30 to 50% of the samples, they fail next generation sequencing. So is there any other way out? Yes, we can analyze it on a circulating tumor DNA. And there are good data to show that there are very high rate of concordance between biopsies and the circulating tumor DNAs. And it is recommended in the guidelines as well. So to summarize regarding the testing part, the optimal, from where to test, the optimal thing is if we are able to send it from a fresh metastatic tumor biopsy, that is optimal. If not, the second in list will be a circulating tumor DNA. The third in the list will be archival biopsy or from the primary tumor tissue. And the fourth in the list will be a germline only testing. Germline only testing may underestimate important somatic HRR mutation. And secondly, it is unable to discern a monoallelic from a biallelic HRR mutations. Now we have understood about the HRR gene HRR. Suppose if our patient is having a homologous recombination gene defect, how to move ahead? We can use PARP inhibitors. The basic concept is synthetic lethality. Basically, there are two: single strand break and double strand break. Single strand break, they get repaired with the help of PARP. If we are giving PARP inhibitors, this single strand break gets converted to a double strand break, which will ultimately be repaired by a homologous recombination pathway. So if this homologous recombination repair are defective, it will lead to a cell death. This is what we want. That is the basic principle of PARP inhibitor, that is synthetic lethality. So basically, as far as the prostate is concerned, maximum evidence is with olaparib and rucaparib. The other two are in the pipeline, this niraparib and dalzaparib. So in brief, I would be mentioning about this trial. Olaparib, it was tested in a phase 3 PROfound trial. It included patients with metastatic CRPC who have progressed on a prior novel hormonal agent. It is either enzalutamide or abiraterone. Prior taxane was allowed, so it would either be in a second line or a third line setting. The patients, they were randomized. The patients, they were divided into two cohorts, cohort A and cohort B. Cohort A had mutations involving BRCA1, BRCA2, and ATM, and cohort B had other 12 alterations. They were stratified based on the prior taxane use and measurable disease, and they were randomized into either olaparib or physician's choice. Physician's choice would be either enzalutamide or abiraterone. Mind it, no docetaxel was there in this physician's choice part in this particular trial. Crossover was definitely allowed. Primary endpoint for radiographic PFS in cohort A. The baseline characteristics, they were well matched. About 65% of the patients, they had prior taxane used. The primary endpoint, that was radiographic PFS in cohort A, was well met. The median radiographic progression-free survival was 7.39 versus 3.55 months. Overall survival in cohort A, that was statistically significant, 19.1 month versus 14.7 month. In cohort B, the curves, they overlapped. Now, if we see HRR subgroup analysis based on BRCA1, BRCA subset, ATM subset, and CDK12 subset, and if you look at the progression-free survival, we can clearly make out that the subset of BRCA, the curves, they are very widely separated. While in ATM, the curves are actually intermingling with each other. The same is true for CDK12 as well. So the same thing applies for overall survival also. In BRCA mutation subset, the curves, they are separated, but while it is not true in ATM and CDK12. Now, if we see for the subset analysis, so HRR is a broad group, is a broad family, which includes many different gene mutations. And the sensitivity of each of them is different. As mentioned, on the left-hand side, the highest sensitivity in this particular trial was with BRCA2. While PP2R2A mutations had even worse data with PARP inhibitors. If you see the forest plot, I just want to highlight on one particular point that those who had a prior taxane use, they did better with olaparib. Safety, mainly GI toxicity and hematological toxicity. Now coming towards rucaparib. Rucaparib, it was tested in a phase 2 trial, that is a Triton 2 trial. It was a single arm study. And the primary endpoint was confirmed overall response rate in patients with measurable disease, as well as a confirmed PSA response. So the responses clearly mentioned as in the waterfall plot. Now, if we see a BRCA1, BRCA2 cohort, the confirmed overall response rate was 33%. And if we see the non-BRCA HRR genes, ATM, CDK12, in ATM it was about 10.5%, CDK12, no overall response rate. So there are so much heterogeneity among those HRR group. As mentioned in this waterfall plot, these were the subset that did good. And there were some BRCA mutations that did bad. Why is it so? The same BRCA mutation in one person is doing good, in other patient is doing bad. It is because these BRCA alterations can have other alterations as well, like BRCA plus MYC or BRCA plus RB1. And if they are having such co-mutations, they do worse, as seen in this particular chart. So if you have BRCA with RB1, it will do worse. BRCA with MYC will do worse. So Triton 3 might be rucaparib. Triton 2 was a phase 2 trial. A phase 3 trial, that is Triton 3 of rucaparib versus physician choice. The results are not out yet, but some differences I would like to highlight. The comparator arm, the physician's choice arm, in PROfound trial, it had only the hormonal agents, abiraterone or enzalutamide. But in this particular trial, even chemotherapy was allowed. About delazoparib, we have the DELAPRO trial. Similar things are seen in this particular parameter also. They are responding very well with BRCA mutations, but not to other HRR mutations. Same is with niraparib, which was tested in the Galahad trial. It had good response rates in the BRCA subset, but not in non-BRCA subset. So one size doesn't fit all. So homologous recombination repair, it's a broad term. It includes many different genes, and the sensitivity of each of them is different. What we know as of now is BRCA2 is most sensitive to PARP inhibitors. ATM and CDK12, they're not that much sensitive. And there are other HRR alterations, but we need further evidence regarding that. So to summarize, about 40 to 60% response rates we can expect. And this is a summary of all the phase 2 trials of PARP inhibitors, which shows about 40 to 50% of response rate. So we have these 4 options: olaparib, rucaparib, terazoparib, and niraparib. So how to choose which is the best? I'm sure Dr. Chirag is going to cover in his panel discussion also. But amongst these 4, which is the best? How to choose? So what I did was I looked at the guidelines, and there was no terazoparib, there was no niraparib as of now. What we have is olaparib and rucaparib. Olaparib for HRR mutation, and rucaparib for BRCA mutation. So olaparib and rucaparib both only in metastatic CRPC setting. Olaparib if we are having a germline anorthosomatic HRR mutation, in which BRCA2 is more sensitive. In rucaparib, the approval as of now is for BRCA1, BRCA2, either germline and or somatic. Olaparib approval needs a prior AR-directed therapy, and rucaparib approval needs a prior androgen receptor and a taxane-based therapy. So these are the difference of as far as the label, the FDA label is concerned. So how to choose? So if you are having a metastatic CRPC patient, for example, say a germline BRCA2 mutation patient has already received a novel hormonal agent and docetaxel, now we are left with to choose a PARP inhibitor, and we have 2 options: olaparib and rucaparib. How will I choose this? As of now, we have good data with olaparib. We have a phase 3 data with olaparib. In rucaparib, we have a phase 2 trial. So slightly, I would be shifting towards olaparib just because the level of evidence as of now regarding olaparib is more. So this is what we have till now. What does the future looks like? The future is regarding the combinations of PARP inhibitors with other agents. We want more non-responders to respond, and we want more responders to become super responders. How can we do that? By combining PARP inhibitors with immunotherapy, by combining PARP inhibitors with other DNA damage repair genes like ATR, by combining it with VEGF inhibitors, by combining it with androgen receptor. There is a term which is known as chemical BRCAness. It means to enhance the sensitivity of the PARP inhibitor by inducing HRD phenotype in HR proficient tumors with molecular targeted agents. So the tumors who don't have HRR mutations, we can induce the HRR mutation in these patients, and we can take the help of PARP inhibitors to have a synergistic effect. So as shown here, there is a good synergy between abiraterone and PARP inhibitor. Abiraterone, AR antagonist, it leads to an impaired DNA repair, and thus it is having a synergistic effect with PARP. So with this hypothesis, a trial is conducted. It's a phase 2 trial. Olaparib plus abiraterone versus placebo plus abiraterone. PFS results are out. It is in favor of the combination arm, but we need to wait for more data. There are some concerns about the cardiovascular adverse effects. Same way, rucaparib plus enzalutamide versus enzalutamide. So these are the combinations which are being tried. There is a rationale of combining PARP inhibitor with immunotherapy. PARP inhibitor, it makes the tumors more immunogenic, and there is a synergistic effect if we add immunotherapy agent with this PARP inhibitor. With this hypothesis, a trial is ongoing with olaparib plus pembrolizumab versus the hormonal agents. Same way, there is a rationale of combining anti-angiogenic agents with PARP inhibitors as well. So this is what the future looks like. The combinations of PARP inhibitors with AR therapy, combinations of PARP inhibitor immunotherapy, so and so on and so forth. And important thing is, these agents are being tested in earlier lines as well. As of now, we have having these agents only in metastatic CRPC setting, but the same agents are being tried in hormone sensitive setting as well. So many promising data are still left, and in future it really becomes more confusing how to choose, when to choose, how to sequence them, etc., etc. One thing about a specific mutation, that is CDK12 mutation. This particular mutation delineates a distinct immunogenic class of prostate cancer. And with this mutation, the responses with anti-PD-1 inhibitors are really favorable. We all know about MSI as a tissue agnostic marker, and we all know how well it responds to immunotherapy. But the thing is, these mutations in a metastatic prostate cancer are very rare. About 2 to 3% will be having MSI H status. One more thing, as far as the precision medicine is concerned, is regarding the androgen receptor variant 7. It is nothing but a truncated form of androgen receptor, which lacks a binding site for abiraterone and enzalutamide. So it leads to a resistance to these novel hormonal agents. And it has been seen that this particular variant is showing efficacy with taxane. So it makes sense to test this particular androgen receptor variant in the beginning. And if this variant is positive, taxanes may be more efficacious than ARD therapies. And if this variant is negative, taxanes may have comparable efficacy to ARD agents. So this may be a treatment selection marker in metastatic CRPC. One more thing, as far as the precision medicine is concerned, is there may be patients who may be having a PTEN loss, which leads to an upregulation of the PI3K, AKT, mTOR pathway. And we have a specific molecule targeting AKT, that is ipatasertib, and the trial of a combination of ipatasertib with abiraterone in this PTEN altered metastatic CRPC was conducted, and it was showing a radiographic progression-free survival benefit as well. This is something new, a bispecific T-cell engager against PSMA. So a molecule which can bring PSMA and the T-cell together and will lead to a cell death. So the field is really looking very, very promising. So coming to my thoughts regarding the role of precision medicine in prostate cancer. So what I can tell is 1 in 4 patients of metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer will be harboring either somatic and or germline DNA damage repair defects. So we should send tissue for this HRD testing in all metastatic, at least in all metastatic CRPC patients, and that too preferably from the metastatic side, because I've shown previously the yield is more. And if positive, then a germline testing to be done to confirm the germline nature of that particular mutation. Secondly, this DNA damage repair defects, they are not one entity. They are definitely one family, but the members, they are having different sensitivity to PARP inhibitors. Probably what data we have is BRCA2 is something is going to respond the best to PARP inhibitors. According to me, sending this testing in a castrate sensitive setting as of now is not an absolute requirement as far as treatment is concerned. These are agents which are approved in CRPC setting. So whether to send it in a metastatic castrate sensitive setting is debatable. As of now, personally, I can avoid it. It's better to do it from a metastatic site on progressive disease. But the data of PARP inhibitor in a castrate sensitive setting, in hormone sensitive setting is evolving. And so as the thoughts, MSI testing should be done in all metastatic CRPC patients. How to choose between the PARP inhibitors? We don't have, as of now, no niraparib, no talazoparib. We have two things, olaparib and rucaparib. The evidence, the level of evidence of olaparib is more stronger. It is in the phase 3 data as of now. What the future looks like is the combination, the PARP inhibitor combination, and using these agents in earlier lines. But as of now, not to be used outside of the context of a clinical trial. Lastly, understanding precision medicine, understanding its various options, understanding various genetic defects and how to target them is science. But the important thing lies in to sequence them, to doing intelligent sequencing, and that is an art. So with this, I just conclude by one of my favorite quotes by Sir William Osler, that the good physician treats the disease, the great physician treats the patient who has the disease. So thank you. With this, I would like to thank Dr. Bharat Parikh sir. I would like to thank especially Dr. Chirag Desai sir and Dr. Talati sir and the entire HOC team for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kshitij. It was an excellent review as of today. In the future, as you rightly mentioned, we may move further and these agents may move further in earlier frontline or in combinations also. But as of today, what is their status? You have rightly mentioned in this precision medicine era. And we are happy that these germline and somatic mutations are now readily available to us very easily, and most of them, they are affordable also. So in the right case, we should take advantage. Now we are moving to the next very important panel discussion, managing metastatic CRPC in our practice. A panel discussion will be moderated by Dr. Chirag Desai. Again, Chirag needs no introduction in oncology community of India, and he has excellent panel today of stars. 3 medical oncologists, 1 nuclear physicist, 1 radiation oncologist, 1 molecular geneticist, and 1 uro-oncologist. I think it's a star panel. I request Dr. Chirag Desai to introduce his star panel team, panelists, and start the moderation of panel discussion. Dr. Chirag.
Thank you very much, sir, for those kind words. And let us start the panel discussion right away. I believe all the panelists are there with us today. Dr. Raja, Dr. Ghanshyam, Dr. Vikas, Dr. Manas, Dr. Madhar, Dr. Salil, and Dr. Jitin. So in last about 2 hours or so, we discussed big things about treating prostate cancers. So there were some controversies as well. And now what we are going to discuss is how to reach the consensus about treating at least metastatic CRPC. So I'm going to discuss some of the consensus documents, and I will try to see from each of the panelists that how we can take these consensus documents into our practice. So the panel discussion is about managing metastatic CRPC in our practice. And so let me ask, starting asking Dr. Raja, that is our practice any different from what we can find out in the guidelines, or should it be different from the guidelines? Dr. Raja, please.
Thank you, Dr. Chirag Bhai, for inviting me here. It was an excellent session so far. I really enjoyed most of the discussions and talk. I think from what I see from the discussions today, and also in several other discussions in different meetings, I believe that the practice pattern in India is largely really reflected from the guidelines. So I'm happy to see that, and I'm also, I'm really impressed with the entire community. So I think the guidelines are well followed, particularly as you have already pointed out, many of them are definitely following NCCN, but then for niche, they go into the European urology and, all these, even more precise guidelines. So that's what is the answer to the first question. The second question is, should it be different? I think that was the second question from largely, I think the, our practice, our experience, our response rates, and all that seems to be mirroring on the published data in a large way. So and two, we have our own, our own, data sets in all these different areas. So my reflex answer is probably we shouldn't be too different. But having said that, we have already understood that our prostate cancer patients are not exactly the same as the Western prostate cancer patients. That is fully understood. I think there is data existing that says that our prostate cancer patients present definitely at an earlier age, and we also see the large burden patients, and we also see, younger patients. I think that is definitely there. So we need to probably think differently and adopt differently, because our patient profiles are probably slightly different from what is available in the West. And lastly, once we move into molecular era, if the data set from our patients show that these genetic arrangements are in a different percentage, so on and so forth, we may have to think differently.
Great, Raja. So many of the slides I have taken are from the consensus guideline for developing countries, which was published in this year in JCO Global Oncology, and then APCCC conference held in 2019. and it was published in European Urology Journal in 2020, where Vedant Murthy was one of the contributors in this particular guideline, and he was the only Indian to have the contribution in this guidelines. So let me ask Dr. Jiten about how do you define CRPC?
So I also authored the CRPC guidelines for USI. So we adopted from the PCWG 3 criteria. So you need to have, at least 2 rises to be documented 3 weeks apart, with the Nadir value being more than 2 and 25% rise above the last value. So you need to have all of these to document progression in, from a HSPC to a CRPC state.
Great. So Ghanshyam, if the patient is on LHRH agonist and comes to you with progressive metastatic disease when treated for CNPC, will you check for level of testosterone in this patient?
Yeah, so if the testosterone level is already a cascade level of less than 40 to 50, so these patients continue to be on a GNRH analog. So we may check.
But you will test, no?
Yeah, we'll check.
My question is, you will check, and what level is your cutoff for calling it castrate level? Is it 20, 50, or
So
more than
40,
that?
sir, some guidelines 40 and some guidelines 50.
So Vikas, your thoughts on that?
I also agree with sir. It's across. I also look at the individual lab values, because it has been some lab values defined somewhere across, and it's always what I see is I maintain the same lab from which it was done previously. So, and I see a consecutive 2 values out of it. So over a month.
So my take on that is that lower the better. The cutoff value is 50, and below 20 is called hypercastration. And there are some data that if we achieve hypercastration, then the outcome is better. But then if the level is let us say 40, 45, we don't need to change the androgen deprivation therapy. I hope Dr. Jiten, you will agree with that?
Yes. So if it is less, it is better, but it is prognostic, but you don't need to, if it's below 50, it's fine. Post orchidectomy, we don't check testosterone levels.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So as Dr. Jiten was mentioning, PCWG2 and then subsequently it was 3. So definition of PSA increase was same between PCWG2 and 3. As Dr. Jiten said, it is a rise of at least 25%. An absolute increase of 2 Ng per ml. If the patient had declined in the PSA with the previous treatment, we should have the second value, which is tested at least 3 weeks or more subsequent to the first reading of increasing PSA, and the 2 values should show the inclining curve. The second value should not go to declining. If we look at the second part of this paragraph, that PSA progression alone is not necessarily an indication to stop the treatment and go to the next treatment. So, henceforth, my focus on the discussion is when to call it a progression, and when we call it a progression, which is the optimum subsequent line of therapy. So I'm not going to discuss about every drug, but of course, I'll be elaborating on the situation at which we will or we will not change the treatment, because we have quite a number of treatment available, but that is not endless. So we have to optimally utilize each line of treatment so that we can offer the best outcome to the patients. To that extent, Dr. Raja, this paragraph goes on telling that only PSA level should not be an indicator for changing the treatment. And then there are 2 curves which are shown, that in one of the example, the PSA drops rapidly and then keeps on increasing gradually before the patient requires palliative radiation, and that is after several months, maybe after 2 or 3 years. And the second curve, the PSA rises rapidly and then keeps on declining gradually and stays stable for a long time. So is that what you see in your practice quite often or occasionally?
That's an interesting question. Not that we do these kind of graphs regularly, to be very truthful to the question. But having said that, reflecting on the previous question, most guidelines said 50, and then they talk about coming to this point, we talk about the doubling time, assuming that now there is no only PSA level alone is rising and there are no clinical situations. So that's the question you're asking. So then we need to look at the doubling time, and then there is something called PSA velocity. All that will tell us whether this patient is going to progress. And then in high PSA values, then again, you decide to do more elaborate scan. There is below 10, you don't have to really do all those so-called newer agent imagings, and above 10, you have to compulsorily do newer agent. The moment you do newer age imagings, you're going to pick up more and more patients with radiological progression also. Finally,
So we have Dr. Manas to answer that question, and we will pass on that question to him when the time comes. This was the consensus statement of St. Gallen 2019 conference that 51% of the panelists voted against switching treatment based on PSA progression alone in the absence of other examinations. 46% voted for switching based on PSA progression alone in a minority of selected patients, and 3% voted for switching against switching the treatment based on PSA progression alone. So there was no consensus to any of the option. So Vikas, what is your take on this sort of voting?
I also believe that I will go with the majority, that we are not at the end of the day treating PSA, we are treating patients at the end of the day. So PSA progression in an asymptomatic patient, I won't change the treatment, but clinical and serologically progression definitely requires a treatment.
Yeah. Can I add something?
No. Yes, please.
Yeah, so this also we took up this year in USI. So there are three distinct entities. One is PSA progression alone without symptoms, which is one already discussed. You don't need to change. Another one is an unequivocal clinical progression, which was actually explicitly defined in AA302 trial.
Jitan,
So,
I will come back to that in the next slide. I mean, that is the slide on the next topic. So I will come back to you on that slide, then you can have your comment.
Right.
So, Ghanshyam, we were telling about symptomatic patient and asymptomatic patient. So, what are the symptoms that you will expect in the patient who progresses after having CRPC?
So one of the reasons in CRPC that even we have now 2 oral drugs, 2 injectables, and probably one cabozantinib will be there. So that is another reason that even the patient comes to you at the end of 4 months on any of these abiraterone or enzalutamide. So you are not changing the drug. So though radiologically stable, because you don't have another option. So you don't want to run out of options. So yeah.
No,
so
my question is simple. What are the symptoms that you might be looking at when you treat CRPC patients?
Yeah. So one of the symptoms is that if the patient has a bone disease which has been already taken care of with radiations or already on a bisphosphonate, the patient is symptomatic. If the patient had a visceral disease and the patient is having symptoms, so like we define as a visceral crisis in breast cancer. So from an existing disease, the patient has been becoming symptomatic while on follow-up. So those can be the symptoms in a CRPC.
So symptoms can be bone pain or lower urinary tract symptoms, or renal failure because of the obstructive uropathy, or patient may have the symptoms because of the visceral disease, right?
Right.
So these are the symptoms that we should closely look at. And then we should also do the radiological evaluation if the patient keeps on having the progression of PSA. And Manas, I know that what you are going to answer, but what are all the options about radiological evaluations that we are offering to our patients?
Well, the options has a wide variety of choice as far as referring clinicians are concerned. So that could be from a CT scan to a bone scan to a MR, and of course nowadays we are using a lot of PSMA scans for the recurrence of prostate cancer. The advantage with PSMA scans are they are very specific and already a very established way of early diagnosis and accurate diagnosis of sites, the volume, and all the details that you need as far as your treatment algorithms are concerned.
So this is 2021 publication of JCO Global Oncology about developing countries. So look at the right side bar, it shows that 82% of the panelists said that CT scan and bone scan are the optimal investigation. But in the ideal situation, if you look at the left side curve, 43% of the panelists considered that PSMA PET CT scan is the optimal way of testing the patients who are having increase in PSA, and 55% of the panelists said that it is still conventional CT scan and bone scan which is of use. So,
Sir, if I
Dr.
can,
Jiten,
Yes.
sir, if I
yes,
can, if you
Manas,
could
please
give
go
me
ahead.
half a minute.
Sure, please go
So
ahead.
we have been, sir, as you are aware that over the years, we have been doing all forms of these earlier, the investigations, what you have said, especially the bone scan and CT scan. But now that last maybe, 5 years, we are involved with PSMA scan. And because it is basically developing countries, so India was one of the earlier countries who accepted from the European research group, and we started doing lots and lots of PSMA scan all around India. And now at this particular point of the experience, there leaves no doubt, sir, that one single investigation is far superior than all the investigations combined together, because we are using a
So,
contrast CT.
right. So, Dr. Jiten, you can enlighten on
Also, add
Dr.
one
Manas'
point.
statement as well as this
Chirag
slide.
bhai, one lead, just
Yeah.
related to this point and
Yes,
what
Raja,
I
go ahead.
told already, up till now, correct me if I'm wrong, or the radiologist can correct me, the PSMA for some reason is not approved, has not yet got the approval in the North America cities. And whereas it is approved in the European Union and
European
some of the Asia Pacific region. So that's what is my understanding. And so therefore that there is that's the reason these recommendations are skewed. As he pointed out, once the approval happens or then the insurance covers, I think everybody will switch.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. So, Dr. Jiten, your comment.
Yes, sir. So about this particular slide about progression. So like everybody said, PSA progression alone is not a great criteria to switch therapy. But there is another entity called unequivocal clinical progression. So which I actually see it in 20% plus patients in my practice, where the PSA is not rising, but patient sometimes they show features like increasing pain or like others said and need for any subsequent therapy. But sometimes there is also a feature of just a decline in performance status. This also qualifies for unequivocal clinical progression. So if somebody is going ECOG 3 or lower, then you watch this patient, these kind of patients actually do worse than those who are progressing radiographically but not clinically. So now we are, recognizing subsets where the progression is now of different types. So radiographic
Dr. Chirag, sir,
alone, yes.
Can I step in, sir? Well, we have now it is well known that, as you are telling, that many of these recurrence patients, they start de-differentiating. So there is a dual mode of evaluation in the form of PET only. So where there are symptoms and you see that the PSA is not high, it's not a bad idea to consider FDG PET scan. These cases somewhat show a lot of FDG avidity, and towards the, if you do the PSMA scans, then possibly you can miss small lesions not picked up on the conventional or good quality contrast CT. So
Agreed.
one can also monitor the progression, especially when the PSA is not going high and the patients are becoming symptomatic with a
Agreed.
dual
So,
tracery.
Dr. Jiten, you can continue on this slide.
Yeah. So like I was saying, so unequivocal clinical progression is actually the worst form of progression that you can see. If radiographic progression adds on to it, that goes obviously compounds it further. So like a participant already mentioned, any surgical intervention for disease related event, if you need radiation, palliative. So we did a study, we are about to publish it, where we use artificial intelligence and machine learning methods to identify prognostic subgroup of patients, those who were going to die within the first 3 years. So we looked at overall survival at the end of 3 years, and we found that those who were needing palliative radiation or any adjunct intervention, this was the best predictive marker for an early death. So, you can predict someone who's going to do bad. That was my point.
So,
We would also add one point to what was already told by Dr. Manas and Dr. Jiten, that among all the other tissues in prostate adenocarcinoma, progress the more you treat, neuroendocrine differentiation is well established
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
So that's an important, more and more getting recognized that this pathway is more the treatment, more harder treatment, neuroendocrine.
But then, Raja, that will be picked up by a radiological investigation and as well as clinical assessment, right?
No,
You
sir.
don't need PSA to assess for
No, I agree.
neuroendocrine transformation. Yeah.
I just wanted to add.
So the point, the direction in which I want to move in this panel is that in the previous slide, I showed that PSA increase is not important. In this slide, I want to show that only radiological progression is not important. So someone can ask, "Arey bhai, कहना क्या चाहते हो?" Clinically देखना है तो why to do all this testing? So Ghanshyam,
Yeah.
how do you change? Look at the bottom part of this slide and tell us that how do you take the decision in your practice about changing the treatment?
So if I have an option left out, so definitely I will change this patient. So if I am running out of options, so I will still hold on for some time, at least to have radiological, clinical, or more of a serological progression. So any of this progression to substantiate for the treatment.
Right. So to make the things easier, not for a particular patient, but in general, to make the guidelines, look at the bottom part of this slide. There was a consensus, 82% of the panelists agreed not to switch MCRPC therapy unless patient meets at least 2 of the following 3 criteria: PSA progression, radiographic progression, and clinical deterioration. So based on only 1 criteria, treatment should not be changed, but there should be 2 criteria, then we should change the treatment. And I hope all the panelists agree. Quickly, quick comment by each of the panelists. Raja?
Totally agreed. You know, we tell long ago from then, we always say this is biochemical disease. I need a radiological progression or clinical progression, without which I don't change the treatment.
Ghanshyam?
Yeah, so I already said so. Yeah, agreed.
Vikas? Vikas?
Agreed, sir. Agreed.
Yeah. And Dr. Jitin?
Yes, I totally agree. And I also suggest that people read this ESMO Open 2020 paper on impact of clinical versus radiographic progression. It's a very good paper, and we should, look at it carefully.
So Malhar, if the patient shows up a couple of new bony metastases, will you start radiation to this patient, or which are the patient you will select for radiation?
Only who is symptomatic, sir.
And if the patient is not symptomatic, then will you ever give radiation to any patient or not?
If it is oligometastasis, then yes.
No, we are talking about CRPC. Oligometastasis is left far behind.
Then only symptomatic, sir.
Okay,
So my question is, if the patient is having quite a huge destruction and patient is still not very symptomatic, so like a vertebral destruction or destruction of the femur or so on and so forth, the weight-bearing bone or inbound bone.
Weight-bearing bones,
yeah.
yes.
Right. So you will not wait for the patient to become symptomatic, but you will give
Sure.
the radiation. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir. Yes. Agreed, sir.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Ghanshyam, switching air-directed therapy, and what are your views? You will always do that? You will sometimes do that? How will you select the patient to switch the treatment from abiraterone to enzalutamide or vice versa?
So actually, across trials also in clinical practice, switching from abiraterone to enzalutamide or enzalutamide actually doesn't work. So at this moment, since you have two drugs, injectable and 2 oral, so you try to switch. So according to one AR, 2 taxanes, and then moving to either taxanes or an enzalutamide.
Because what is your view on switching from one air-directed therapy to another? Vikas is muted or what?
Vikas is muted. Vikas, unmute yourself.
Or maybe Raja can take this question.
Yes, Chirag bhai. Yeah, I want to allude to the point that what is the basis of CRPCs is just the castration-resistant prostate cancer. What happens, it does not mean that the cell has still lost its androgen sensitivity. There is something else happening there. So actually, it just lost the the castration level and all that one, but still it is amenable to some sort of an androgen receptor kind of a drive. So basically, that is the basis that has been, if you look at all the guidelines, they repeatedly emphasize that CRPC does not mean that they have lost the androgen sense. That pathway is not completely lost. So that is important. So therefore, including some form of baseline suppression is important. Number two, in that setting, you can then start going into blocking the androgen receptor. That's why this enzalutamide or apalutamide or the newer darolutamide, everything has come into picture. So that still makes sense. And then, I mean, docetaxel is always there, cabazitaxel, you can choose it as per your disease burden or not. But I just want to add one more point. There is something called, there is something called multidirectional therapy, in which you can expose these patients to alternative high, androgen level to low androgen levels. If you can sequence, it has been shown that these patients can reclaim their androgen sensitivity and they can. So this is already well described. So the point I'm trying to make is, if just because it's CRPC, it does not mean that you have to lose out on. So it looks very natural. The question 74, majority of them switch to enzalutamide. That's the basis on which they have switched. I agree on that.
Right. So we continue with androgen deprivation anyway. Switching from enzalutamide to abiraterone, there are not many takers unless the patient had a prolonged response to abiraterone. But the other way around, abiraterone to enzalutamide, there are some patients who are responding. But in both the situations, the consensus was not reached among the participants. And then the question comes, and the question goes to Vikas if he's there.
Can I add
Vikas, you are
something?
there? Yes, please.
Yeah. So switching from Enza to Abira, there is only 4% expected response rate as per CARD trial data now. But so there was this huge thing about visceral mets and docetaxel. It should be preferred in HSPC setting. But in CRPC now there is actually a randomized data. This was in April 2021. You can read this in Annals of Oncology, where if there is a poor risk disease with visceral metastasis, then cabazitaxel is a better choice than anti-androgen, this novel anti-androgens. So for visceral
trial, right?
No, this is in April 2021 latest trial. This we are actually discussing in USI this year in USICON. So for the first time, we have level 1 evidence where you in the CRPC setting, if you have visceral mets, then a taxane, which is cabazitaxel, is a better choice than a novel anti-androgen. While for HSPC, this is not true.
Is that patient prior treated with the docetaxel?
Yes, prior progression. Yes.
They have been already, that's the point. The prior docetaxel treated patients versus prior non-docetaxel treated patients are different. So that's also important.
Yes, and prior androgen receptor pathway. So if any of these is there, don't switch on to a newer this one. Just go on to cabazitaxel without doubt.
Dr. Salil, what is your view on testing ARV7?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it should be done in cases where there is a resistance, definitely, because there are these mutations, ARV7 and other point mutations also, like T878A resistance. So this give all resistance to this particular kind of therapies. So definitely it has to be done in all these kind of cases.
So what is the data showing? It is tissue based, or it is the circulating tumor cell, or it is ctDNA, or what kind of ARV7 we are looking at?
For example, we'll look at first the tissue, and if it is not available in most of the cases, when it has been exhausted, we look for a circulating tumor DNA, and we look particularly for this particular mutation. Then it has to be standardized, basically.
Yeah,
right.
So
this is an important testing.
DNA is better.
So,
circulating is better because it reflects the genome better.
Right. So maximum data we have is about CTC. The burden of data is about CTC. But then Oncotype has developed on tissue as well as then we have the data of ctDNA also. But the thing is that even though it is a good test, majority of the people do not agree to use that. You can say that 85% voted against use of ARV7. And one of the reasons for that is that the testing method is yet not standardized. That is first thing. And second is that there are no randomized clinical trials to support the testing and selecting the treatment based on ARV7 mutation. So, do you agree,
So,
Dr. Jitan?
so this data has also changed. So there is now a prophecy trial, which is not randomized but prospective, because there is actually no real way to randomize this practically. So, but it's a prospective multi-center trial, prophecy trial. You can read it up. They have conclusively proven that if you are ARV-V7 positive, no need to give Enza or Abira. Straight away move on to
Wonderful.
taxane.
Wonderful. So what we have learned so far from the discussion so far was that PSA with clinical and radiological evidence is required before changing the treatment. Imaging modalities are changing, and we will find in the subsequent years that what is the best way to do the imaging. ARV7 is not useful in decision of whether AR-directed therapy or chemotherapy is to be done right now. But as Dr. Jitan said, the things are changing, and
Yeah.
sequencing of AR-directed therapy is not useful.
We have put up a 40 crore grant to ICMR to do ARV-V7 testing in India. We want to change the way it's done to make it cheaper. Right now, each test will cost you more than 1 lakh. So we want to bring
Right.
that cost down.
So Jitan, the question is for you only, that what is the role of bicalutamide contemporarily?
So it's just 5% added survival advantage if given in HSPC setting. Maybe the cardiac toxicity still outweighs the benefits. So we don't give it really. There is some data on reintroducing bicalutamide when there is progression in CRPC with some 10 to 20% response rates, depending, I mean, how well he was responding previously. Again, it's very sketchy data. We have better agents available. So practically, we have not, just gone ahead and not giving it now.
Right. Vikas, are you there? Or Vikas has gone?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, Vikas. So what is your view on the role of low-dose abiraterone with breakfast?
I believe, sir, everybody of us use this drug. I have been using quite often with that data available, and the results are similar. The toxicity is much less, and I don't know when we're going to have a randomized trial, but definitely a phase 2 trial which has this reports for
So
us.
it was phase 2 randomized trial of 76 patients, 38 patients in each arm, and where it showed some superiority, so equivalence of low dose versus
For me, it is practice
routine
changing.
dose.
Definitely, yes, sir. Because I use it for most
Okay.
of my patients, and
So what consensus statement, both developing country as well as the APCCC says that it is okay for the countries with resource constraint, but otherwise the conventional way is to be observed. So do you agree with that or you don't agree with that?
agreed, totally agreed. I use it for my patients also, most of my patients, and I find it as equivalent as the standard dose.
So Vikas, you're using
Right.
it in CRPC or HSPC or both now?
Both now, sir.
Both, yeah. So HSPC is outside label indication. We are also using it.
Yes,
Maybe we can do a trial, this is
Def-
doable. Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
I am on, sir, one of many of the collaborative research groups, and we are have proposed in the DGCI same similar trial. So we would love to have RGCI as one of the
Yeah,
center
we
level
will love to participate. Include
Wonderful.
it.
Because this is definitely
So-
a practice changing. No pharmaceutical company would do that, and it's
Yes,
it's
yes.
So Ghanshyam, what is the dose of steroid with abiraterone that you are using?
So normally 5 milligrams. So in most of the patients, because most of these patients are elderly, so 5 milligram.
5 milligram OD or BD or 10 milligram OD?
So OD I give normally. Sir.
Okay, so in HSPC it is 5 milligram OD, but with CRPC it is 5 milligram BD. And then there are people who uses 10 milligram OD as well as Dexona. Sometimes people are using. So that was this question was there in the APCCC conference, and the recommended dose was 5 milligram BD for CRPC. And Ghanshyam, you only once a patient progresses on either abiraterone or one of the taxane, you continue with steroid or you stop at some point in time.
No, I completely stop steroids.
Right. So it should be tapered off. It should not be continuous for a long time. So that's what comes out from the consensus statement. So what about the patient progressing after docetaxel and AR-directed therapy? So Raja, my question is cabazitaxel versus another AR-directed therapy, and I think partly Jitan answered this question. So what's your views on that?
No, I think he already answered. We don't have, I think, post-enzalutamide, we still don't have the other molecules so far. That's one answer. Second thing is cabazitaxel. Fortunately, now there is a generic brand available, so that is second answer. Third thing is in our institute we use a lot of lutetium therapy, and probably I'm told that we have one of the largest experience in lutetium therapy in the country. We have switched along, and we see excellent responses with lutetium therapy. So that's another great option for us. In fact, given a choice, the quality of life is so good. I would rather choose,
Lutetium,
therapy. I mean, I would reserve, but I'm interested to see what Dr. Jane pointed out, the new data. But I would hold on with the cabazitaxel until then.
There is actually very good data. In fact, now we have therapy trial, which was a preliminary data was out in the. So yeah, he's showing that slide. Huh? Is this the one?
Yeah.
So PSMA lutetium is actually a better choice. It has higher 50% PSA 50 responses and much better quality of life. Even in our setting, I very much have to think 36% response rate versus 50 to 70% response rate. PSMA lutetium wins hands down.
So Manas, how do you select your patient?
So
yes,
I mean,
Manas,
just for the information of the panel that last almost
listen
4
to my
5
question
years.
First.
Yes, sir, please.
Manas, listen to my question first. So how do you select your patient with for lutetium PSMA?
Well, for the lutetium PSMA, the patient needs to have a positive PSMA scan positive, so that we know that it is a well-established adenocarcinoma. It has not de-differentiated. The second, marker would be a high PSA, which will add to our, information that it is still adenocarcinoma. Third, we look at the renal function. So, in case if a patient has got already a bulky nodal disease in the pelvis, which is hydroureter, and then subsequent kidney, issues. So these are the patients we sort of try to avoid, and especially in particular the patients who have got osseous metastasis. In our experience of 4 5 years, Dr. Chirag, as you are aware, that we have been using the lutetium based treatment a lot, and so the osseous metastasis part.
Do you also do FDG?
No, not in routine. So if we get to see, because sir, already the patients are exhausted as far as finance are concerned. So many of the centers in India, they have got options where they do FDG also. But personally, if we see that the PSA is significantly high and there is a subsequent correlation of everything, possibly we can avoid FDG. But then if there is a clinical...
Raja, do you do FDG in your patient? You said you have good experience of lutetium.
I have, we have, I mean, as he rightly pointed out, suppose the patient is, the PSA is high and the PSMA scan is clearly explaining the clinical situations. We don't have to do the FDG, but
exactly, sir,
the dual scanning, if I'm not clinically, able to explain what's happening in the patient and the PSMA is not giving me everything, then sometimes we have resorted to dual imaging, but we'll be happy with the PSMA.
Yeah,
so what is your view on that?
So now we are routinely doing FDG. We are forced to do because of this and some other data, this trial and some other data, where if you have a discordant lesion, it shows on FDG, not on PSMA, this patient will not respond.
Just a second, sir. If
yes,
I can see, there could be few sites which would be positive on the FDG. So this does not force you to take the benefit of the lutetium treatment. But I mean, it's music to the ears that, two of the senior panelists are telling what we have been trying to, push. And already we have high volumes of, metastatic prostate cancer. Here, I would like to add that we have got two options, sir. One is lutetium based, which is giving beta, radiation, and, it's injected through the IV. And it goes to the metastatic sites and gives a very good, dose of radiation, which is just not possible to get from external beam radiotherapy. The other option is through actinium. Now, these actinium are the molecules which are giving alpha radiation. So only few selective centers in India, possibly one of those where, senior people are, in the panel, maybe they are doing it. But I know that Bangalore HCG is, so actinium is very good. Actinium is just superb, sir. And last point I would like to say, sir, that these patients, when they come to us, they are having a very high volume of disease for whatever reason, at least in our practice. And everyone is expecting a miracle after the first cycle. So what has to be understood, it is too less for such a high volume disease. So every about say 6 to 8 weeks, you need to give at least 3 cycles, ideally even 4, to really know and check on the benefits
Okay.
what all lutetium can give to a given
So-
patient metastatic. Yes, sir.
The
Please.
time is really running out, so we have to hurry up now. Last 2 questions. The first is to Dr. Ghanshyam. Not many patients in our country are affording for a PARP inhibitor. So do you see any role of platinum in metastatic CRPC?
Yeah, so somebody who is HR mutated, so and those who cannot afford the PARP inhibitors, so yeah, definitely, so this patient can be a candidate for platinum with some PFS.
Vikas, your view on that? If Vikas is muted, Raja, can you take this question?
Sorry, Chirag bhai, I just missed the question. What is that? Sorry.
So
Not every
chemotherapy
patient
for-
in our country are affording PARP. So any role of platinum in metastatic CRPC?
Interesting question. We routinely do. I mean, we routinely do NGS on all our patients, and we have few patients on the PARP inhibitors. Platinum as a surrogate for PARP inhibitors, I have not tried that, Chirag.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, let us
want to add to one point that actinium is really, even after several doses of lutetium, actinium is still working. Number one. Number
Okay.
two, whenever there is a renal
So-
and all that. So he
Thank
brought.
you, sir. Thank you so much.
So before we close, we can have quick comment from each of the panelists, starting from Dr. Salil.
Yes, thank you,
You want to
Chirag
say
bhai.
something?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
you
is,
want to say something about molecular analysis?
yes, you will find a lot of BRCA2 positive, but we have to be very careful when the report is saying it's VUS, variant of unknown significance. So in that condition, PARP inhibitors, how it will work is a question. So that is my main worry about when you have a VUS in your reports.
Dr. Madhar, you want to make any last comment?
No, sir, everything is clear.
Wonderful. Dr. Manas, any last comment?
The only thing is that the PRRT treatment has very least side effects and could be combined with the chemotherapy drug. So it's should be opted in early stage.
So we are opening up the era of the new trial. Anyway, Dr. Vikas. Dr. Ghanshyam.
Yeah, so the sequencing of the available drugs is important till we have more drugs. So PRRT, there are patients who will definitely benefit. So all possible patients should go for a molecular testing because we know that at least 1 out of 4 patients will have some HRR mutations.
Dr. Raja.
Chirag bhai, I think, taking on the theme of what is next, NGS is very important, and 25% of the patients are going to show, BRCA, HRR mutations. And the BRCA2 is the one that, if you look at the data set, BRCA2 is the one that responded very well, and BRCA1 didn't do as much as BRCA2. And then comes the ATM and all. Again, there is a role for doing MSI in patients who have high MSI. You have the immune checkpoint inhibitors, and then again, if you have what they call CDK2, and if you're able to demonstrate what they call frame shift mutations, they are all very, very good candidates for immunotherapy. And the last thing is now the next thing is PARP, as was already beautiful talk by Satish, as was presented. PARP plus combos have already come even in the HSPC setting. I think that's going to come. I mean, it's already there. That's what I believe.
Dr. Jiten.
Yeah, so we recently did crystal balling for the future, and the thing that we saw, what really excited us was this PEACE-1 trial, which is telling that you combine dosi and abiraterone with ADT plus minus radiotherapy, and you have humongous benefits. I mean, the final paper is not out, But if the benefit stays like what it is, it will become the standard of care, because across low and high volume settings, it was showing unequivocal benefit. The second thing I see after this would be the CRRTs, because after you already taken your novel anti-androgen chemotherapy, the best results that we are now seeing across multiple trials that are soon going to get published would be for lutetium and actinium. Then of course, lot of genetics we are going to understand, and that is going to open the new era. So this is how I see it evolving in the next few years.
So, thank you very much. So, thanks to the organizer for giving me this opportunity, and thanks to all the panelists for leading the wonderful discussion. Dr. Bharat Bhai, your comment, and then we will close.
Yeah. Thank you, Chirag. It was a wonderful panel discussion, and I thank by my heart Chirag for the wonderful moderation, and all the panelists. They have brought out many points. Dr. T. Raja, Dr. Manas, Dr. Malhar, Dr. Salil, Dr. Jiten, Dr. Ghanshyam, and Dr. Salil. I think with the progression in our understanding and availability of this imaging test, molecular test, still all have underlined the one thing, and that is we will not look at only one point, PSA, imaging, but we'll look also at the clinical things, and whether patient is symptomatic or asymptomatic, what is the performance status, what is the previous treatment he has received, and what are his available biomarkers. I think future is bright for the patients and for us, that precision medicine will give many answers. And still, the last thing, Chirag's last slide, cancer cells are not reading these guidelines. And many times, some patients may present wonders for us, and we will learn more and more. And at present, the subsets which are not responders may turn out to be something new or highly responsible for with the newer agents. So whole program was very nice. I congratulate Dr. Kshitij and Dr. Chirag for the wonderful organization. And by heart, I thank all the panelists for their wonderful comments, experience sharing. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
And let's join for the cocktail at each individual house.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
night.
Good night. Yeah, sure.